faces of our community. That's important to us. And we'll be able to go off camera once our presenters start to share about their report, but it's great to see you all. Thank you, thank you. I see faces.
I see faces. We love seeing faces. Hello and good evening. I am Donna McBride. I am one of the co-chairs for the Empowerment Congress Civic Engagement Working Group. We are so pleased to have you tonight as we have this special presentation on the state of Black LA. Hold on one second, you guys. And so I'm going to just really briefly, like I said, I introduced myself. I want to make sure that I introduce my two co-chairs. The first one is Gloria Davis. She is the Executive Director of Girls Club Los Angeles. Gloria and I and Dr. Shani Byard have been working together for almost a decade or so in the Empowerment Congress. And so we truly have become a tribe and family, and we are pleased to be able to join all of you or have all of you join us this evening. The Empowerment Congress is an organization that was founded in 1992 by then council member Ridley Thomas. And over the course of 30 plus years, we have existed really to educate, to engage, and to empower. And so we are here to do exactly that today, and we are so pleased that you are here to join us. I'm not going to continue talking, but I do ask that you join us in this work. And you can do so by going to the website, www.empowermentcongress.org. You can sign up to join our working group. There are other working groups as well. So we have our homeless working group, our city charter reform, as well as a financial related civic group. So sorry, let me try that again. A financial related work group. All three of those, as well as the civic engagement work group, can be found on our website. So we hope that you join us. And with no further delay, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Shani Byard.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you, Danette. It's great to see everyone. I'm Dr. Shani Byard from I'm the workforce director for Providence Health and also curator for Legacy Refresh and co-chair of the Civic Engagement Work Group for Empowerment Congress. And it's really an honor, first of all, that you all are here, and definitely take a moment to visit our website. Oh, I see you. Hi. Okay, there's a live link there, so that's good. Visit our website, get familiar, and please, think about joining one of the work groups. This is the Civic Engagement. So thank you for being here. And I would love to introduce our presenters for this evening. It's really timely work that they have to share with all of us, presenting on the State of Black Los Angeles County report. And these are the authors. So we get up close and personal presentation from those individuals who took the time to research and put together this report for us. That is Dr. Donna J. Nicol. She is the chair of the Africana Studies Department at Cal State University, Dominguez Hills. And also Dr. Anthony Samad, longtime community leader, activist, all things, also executive director of the Mervyn Dimely Africa America Political and Economic Institute at Cal State University, Dominguez Hills. So without further ado, I will turn it over to you all. Just a reminder for everyone, we are here until 7:30 or until, we might finish early. We want to make sure that you have Q&A, time for Q&A and discussion. So please make note of what you would like to request or ask or share after the presentation. That would be great. And make sure to stay on mute until our discussion time so that we can not have our presenters distracted. Okay. All right, Dr. Samad and Dr. Nicol, I'll turn it over to you.
Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Byard. I'm Dr. Anthony Samad, and I'm the director of the Mervyn Diamond African American Political and Economic Institute. I would like to thank the Empowerment Congress for presenting us this platform on a short notice. Special shout out to Supervisor, Councilman, and all-time great community activist Mark Ridley Thomas for getting us in the loop. This report was unveiled in April, and we thought it was important to get it out into the community because we know that Los Angeles County has a lot on their plate, particularly the Anti-Racism, Diversity, and Inclusion Initiative that are also looking at other communities. But this report was so stunning that we thought that we needed to get it some traction in our community. Let's talk a little bit very quickly about how it came to California State University, Dominguez Hills, and how Dr. Nicol and myself got involved. After the George Floyd killing, our president, Dr. Thomas Parham, appointed a campus-wide anti-racism task force. And he named Dr. Nicol and myself the chairs of that task force, which was to look at systems throughout the university and try to bring forth recommendations in a report on how to make California State University, Dominguez Hills, an anti-racist institution. He was approached by County Supervisor Holly Mitchell and the director of the Anti-Racism, Diversity, and Inclusion Task Force to do this study. He said that he thought it was important that the social justice history of California State University, Dominguez Hills played a significant role, since a significant part of the county report is in the university service area. The social justice mission of the Cal State Dominguez Hills is that it was put in Carson as a result of the Watts riots. The university was set up to be California State College, Palos Verdes, which was the state's response to Pepperdine University. And then after the riots, the location was moved to Carson. So basically, the African-American community and what was going on in '65 had a significant impetus in where our location is today. And so he tasked Dr. Nicol and myself with being the researchers for this report, and particularly looking at the history of racism in Los Angeles County and looking at the migration of African Americans in Los Angeles County. So we agreed to do it only if we could lay out a true picture of the state of Black Los Angeles and the compounded effects that racism has. And so what we did was we were responsible for identifying, the areas that we wanted to study. And we just didn't want to do the same thing that had been done in prior reports. We wanted to pick areas that were relevant to today's circumstance, okay, which was health, education, economics, public safety / criminal justice, and we wanted to focus in those areas in a way that showed that the gap was widening. I believe when I attended an empowerment summit meeting last year, and I reported out from one of the tables that we were in the midst of a racial retrogression study, that essentially the data was coming out at that time that the circumstances of African Americans were worse than it had been in 50 years, and that there were some factors beyond just snapshot in time, economic snapshot in time, health status snapshot in time, education, those types of things. That there was an underlining sentiment beyond Black and white racism that our community needed to address. And so we wanted to put a very heavy emphasis on anti-Blackness that was taking place in our city, and has been taking place in our city for several decades, that subsequently has created.
I want to make sure we are up, we are ready, and we are ready to learn, because listen, once we get started, we will not stop. And so we want to make sure.
Is that somebody else? All right. Anyway, I want to continue. We wanted to make sure that people understood that this circumstance is not, the exception, but it is the rule. We oftentimes look at factors in our community and don't necessarily want to paint it with a broad brush, but particularly with respect to economics and health status, we face a entrenched poverty that has fed the homeless situation, the housing shortage and the rental shortages, and some of the systemic variables, such as charging rental applications for a population that makes $20,000 less than their white counterparts, means that many people have one shot in an apartment. They pay their $500, and if they don't get it, they're on the streets. We look at suppressed wages. We look at a long-term picture of what economic subjugation has done to us. Economic subjugation is essentially where they hire us last, fire us first, pay us less, charge us more, and work us harder so we die sooner. And this report bore out the fact that Black mortality in Los Angeles is, 6 years less than the aggregate and 11 years less than our white counterparts. So there are variables, the policing variables in the county are systemic, and they have nothing to do with isolated instances. We have a dozen cities in this region in the county that are historically sundown towns. And what sundown towns were law enforcement using methods of social control to ensure that African-American residents were not in their towns after dark. And some of them now have quite large populations. And certainly when you look at the citations and look at the references that we used, you'll see many of the cities that have significant Black populations that still use sundown town practices in their policing as a form of social control. So, it's not just LAPD or LA County Sheriff. It's Torrance Police, it's Pasadena Police, it's Culver City Police, and we see a disproportionate amount of stops, a disproportionate amount of arrests. All are vestiges of past racial behaviors that have not been rooted out of our society to date. So we are disproportionately represented in the county jail and subsequently the state prison system. And so when we begin to talk about equity, we can't talk about equity and not look at those communities that are disproportionately arrested. And our community has been for the longest time in a state of arrested development. When you talk about, access to capital, we've been talking about access to capital since the 1980s, and we still have significant access to capital issues in our community. We have situations where the developer forces have overtaken the policy forces. And so as a result, developers were able to overbuild in certain parts of the city and not address affordable housing. And then for the longest, the economics of our city allowed suppressed wages to essentially wages grow at a slower pace than inflation and rent inflation in particular, to where you have communities where, like Santa Monica, where they didn't let developers build housing that exceeded 20 to 25% of the median income of that area, whereas most of the areas that African Americans live, almost 80% pay 50% or more of their incomes to housing, which then means that other areas of their household, particularly healthcare, particularly transportation, become compromised. So those are the types of things that we looked at in this particular study that we could back with data and then begin to have conversations with the policymakers and the bureaucracies, because the bureaucracies do play a role. There are people who have been waiting forever for housing vouchers. There are people who have been waiting forever for subsidies that other communities have gotten, and for some reason they have not penetrated African American communities. And so we have to have a different kind of conversation with policymakers as it relates to structural racism, because we will never catch up. If we don't, we will never catch up. And we find ourselves then in a circumstance throughout society, and this is not just California, it's places all over the country where the only opportunities that African Americans have to move up the economic scale, the socioeconomic scale, is to take on service jobs, the lowest paying jobs, or to take, on the underground economies, which then feed the jail and prison systems. So I'll stop there and then I'll turn it over to my counterpart, Dr. Donna Nicol.
All right, thank you, Dr. Samad, especially for giving us the background context to how we arrived at this place to work on this report. If I'm not mistaken, the last time there was a significant report on Black Los Angeles, it was done by the Urban League in the 1990s, early 2000s. So it's been quite some time since we've actually really investigated where Black people are in the county. What I want to do is to kind of go look at the report, the digital form, and kind of highlight a few areas of possible interest to this group. I got too many windows open. All right, so this is the landing page for the report. Again, this was an effort by the Antiracism Diversity Initiative, along with Cal State Dominguez as the primary researchers with CTI, Capacity to Impact, who would help work with the what's the best way to put it, the quantitative data. Our role was to help to unpack the quantitative, the numbers, and to give context. I'm a historian by training, and I believe that most of the time people talk outside of historical context. And so there's this pattern of repeating the same things over and over because we haven't learned from our past. And so in the report, if you go in, the sites has a lot of live links, and it'll give you an introduction and some idea of the many variables that we use to kind of put this all together. What I want to draw your attention to in this introduction, we tell you why the report is needed. What you will see here are a number of QPR codes that will give you some additional information, background information. One thing that became really clear to us is defining what makes up Black Los Angeles. And we were very intentional about using the term Black because Los Angeles County's demographic is changing. So we have this kind of historic Black community of African Americans who have been here for many decades, and you have these emerging groups. And so that would include African immigrants, Afro-Latinos, Afro-Caribbean people. So that was one thing that was important for us to kind of make sure we attended to the fact that we have new and emerging groups. But one of the things that was interesting and disheartening at the same time was looking at the key geographies of Black Los Angeles. And what we mean by that are areas of the city, sections of the city or the county by Black population, by either numbers or percent. And so what you can do in the report is you can click on one of the key geographies. So let's look at Compton, for example, and you click on it. And what it will do is it gives you some background information about Compton. So for instance, Compton is a perfect example of how a Black middle class suburban dreams can turn into an urban nightmare. White flight from the city damaged the city's financial standing in the 1960s with the loss of small businesses and sales tax. So as the city's financial finances worsened, the crime rate soared, and many people fell victim to predatory lending and lost their homes. Those homes, those abandoned homes, became magnets for drug and gang crime. And so the reason why we've included Compton in this list is because it gives a glimpse of the top to bottom failures of city officials and state legislators to put policies in place that would stabilize the housing market. Compton, for those of you that are unaware, when Compton elected its first Black mayor, Douglas Dollarhide, that is when the credit rating of the city went down. These white investors basically pulled out, and you see the white flight. So this mixes, these key geographies mix information about contemporary and historical factors that impact where Black people live in the city. So this was interesting because you see a lot of difference within the community. So if you look at Baldwin Hills or obviously View Park, you're going to see high rates of college going or college attendance. But because the Baldwin Hills and View Park land in unincorporated parts of the county, they don't have the same kind of representation that incorporated parts would. Athens Westmont is another one. There's 44,000 residents in Athens Westmont, and they are serviced by one hospital, and that's Martin Luther King. And so how do you help 44,000 people with only one hospital, and a hospital that has been on shaky ground for many years? My part of the report was to look at the physical health consequences for Black people. I was particularly interested in looking at looking backwards in order to understand how Black people were faring with regards to COVID. But to just talk about COVID without explaining to people what the county has done or not done with regards to protecting or helping Black people in terms of health would do us a disservice. So just like using the example I used with Martin Luther King Hospital, the county had put in policies that made it difficult for Black people to access care in the county. So what the report does, let me go back because I think it's important to go back. So before you get into the detail of each of the domains, so we considered domains to be the areas of focus. So we had 5 primary domains. We ended up kind of making a 6th one in mental health. So health, housing and homelessness, income and employment, education, and criminal justice, and like policing. Before you even get there, you go through the highlights and key findings page. And so on these, here is where you will get the numbers, right? So this is where you get the statistics. So for example, I'll go to physical health. And so what we created in conjunction with the county is to create a number of charts so you could visually see what these numbers are. So the life expectancy, Dr. Samad referred to this, the life expectancy for Black people in Los Angeles County is almost 75 years of age. But you compare that with Asian Americans, they have the highest rate at almost 87 years. And the red line is going to represent the county average. So you can see Black people are not faring well in terms of life expectancy. And down at the bottom of each one of these charts, there's additional tabs for additional information. So for example, Black people actually have a fairly high rate of health insurance. But then when you go to looking at diabetes rates, we have significantly high diabetes rates. So is it that we're not utilizing the insurance, or the doctors ignoring us when we come in and making complaints about or saying we have these particular ailments? What's going on? If you look at infant mortality, our infant mortality rate is through the roof. And consequently, or connected to that, maternal mortality rates are extremely high. So one way to look at this is to look at it from the numbers. And these charts will help you, kind of visually see where Black people stand. Depression, suicide, and so forth. But what Dr. Samad and I were really focused on is to unpack these numbers. You can't rely on simply a set of numbers without explaining what were the factors that led to these numbers in the first place. So for my part, I did physical health, and we combined interviews from subject matter experts, combined with the data, the numbers, and then also the background research that we did ourselves in looking at the kind of history of these issues in the county. And so it will give you a more complete understanding of why are Black people where they are. One thing I want to draw your attention to, and I thought was important for us to include, is to understand the long history of how the county has dealt with racism in health. So if you click on this link that says read anti-Blackness in health, it's a little bit of a misnomer, but this article here that I wrote is about the history of anti-Blackness in healthcare in LA County. So starting from roughly the 1890s all the way to the present, looking at what contributed to Black people not getting the care that they need. Starting after the Civil War, And then when you had the Spanish flu pandemic and Black people were not treated for that, then the tuberculosis pandemic, and even attempts by Black people to create their own healthcare systems with the Dunbar Hospital in 1922. We made an attempt as a collective to try to, put systems in place, but, it was very difficult to get the funding necessary to build and maintain hospitals and blood banks and clinics. And so I would encourage anyone who wants to understand why we are where we are with Martin Luther King Hospital, and having some limited services there, to read through this and understand what were the policy failures that contributed to where we are at this moment. Another thing that's that the ARTI office, which is anti-racism, included was to look at the life expectancy by the supervisors' districts. And so you can see here very clearly across the board, the lowest life expectancy is at the top, the highest life expectancy is at the bottom, based on the section that you are in as supervisor's district. And you can see really clearly for District 2, where Supervisor Mitchell supervises, is that the life expectancy does not go over 77, where everyone else has at least one area that goes over 80. So that's just telling you right there, if you look at these districts, you look at how much money that people make, the average income, or the educational level, how many parks and services that these areas have. There's a direct relationship between money and having access to services. Another thing that was important, if you read through this article, talks about people accessing insurance. One of the challenges, the many challenges with COVID, in terms of the rollout of COVID information, the disinformation campaigns, the vaccine skepticism within the Black community. All of those are factors in why Black people had the lowest vaccine. I don't know how to call it, the lowest rates of getting the vaccine, but also some of the highest rates of death from COVID. And what are the economic pressures that the pandemic put on Black households? If the majority of people have to be essential workers that work outside the home, and they're living in multi-family households, how are they able to stem the spread of COVID if they're in such close proximity to one another? So I would encourage anyone who really wants to delve deeper into, just from the health perspective, if not all the other domains, to really go through the report and jot down some questions and to pose to policymakers, like, what is the county's plan to address these issues? Because I think without having, now that you have data, now that you have background historical information, you can make a really good argument for why there needs to be policy. That it's not something that is anecdotal, but something that is based in evidence. One of the things that Dr. Samad and I said when we were doing this work is that we wanted to be very, very honest about the state of Black Los Angeles and not paint a rosy picture if it didn't exist. And I think that we did a good job of being able to achieve that. That there's some things that are good. I mean, Black people have a fairly good rate of insurance, but you got to balance that with, are they experiencing racism when they go to the hospital? So you can have all the insurance in the world, but if that doesn't translate into people taking you seriously when you complain of an ailment, then it's not enough. Just having the minimum is not enough. And so I'm going to pause right there because I think the questions, the Q&A might provide an opportunity for folks to pick our brain or complain or whatever else. Dr. Samad, did you have something?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think that that was a good starting point because health is wealth. If you don't have your health, then your capacity to earn is limited and your access to other venues in society, housing, employment, those types of things are limited. But I do want people to look at income and employment section, which I worked on, because there's a direct correlation there to homelessness.
Mm-hmm.
I know that there has been a disproportionate focus on homelessness as it relates to the city and county of Los Angeles over the past decade and a half. But I don't think that there has been enough. I think, and this is controversial, but it's the truth. I think that many of the policymakers have been lazy in terms of really looking beyond the housing shortages as the cause for homelessness. The housing shortages is a cause for homelessness, but there has been a bigger impact in terms of economic stability. People have fallen out of their homes who are fully employed, who work a full-time job, sometimes two, and because of wage suppression or because of the inability to navigate the bureaucracies, they have not gotten the sufficient help in time to avoid becoming unhoused. And I think a lot of the conversation, a lot of discourse focuses on, building more housing. But as several studies that we looked at and several studies that were produced by the county and the city showed that the rate of homelessness was outpacing the construction of new affordable houses. So they were never able to get ahead of it because they didn't look at other aspects of what was impacting homelessness. And the biggest impact, of course, is wage suppression, the proliferation of service jobs over industry jobs or manufacturing jobs, or bringing industry into the city that gave African Americans access to the higher paying jobs.
Thank you, Dr. Samad and Dr. Nicol. I see the chat getting populated with feedback and thoughts. But before we turn over, we start the Q&A, our founder is on the call. So I want to make sure that Dr. Mark Ridley Thomas has an opportunity to make some remarks. If you're still there. Maybe he stepped away. All right, so Courtney, let us know. In the meantime, I think we can go at least start in the chat. I saw a question about recommendations from Marvin, former Empowerment Congress Leadership Council member. Hello, Marvin. Good
hello.
To see you. I want to start with your question around, are there a set of recommendations that are made to address these issues that folks can go to? You mentioned, Dr. Nicol, about bringing up the issues, speaking back to, or bringing up the issues to the county supervisors, and asking what their plan is. Are there any recommendations that people can get access to help shape their argument?
Yeah, actually, Heather from Artie posted some of the recommendations that came from the stakeholders, because there were stakeholders, not the subject matter experts, but the stakeholders who are community activists, community leaders, who brainstormed a few ideas, such as create centers for health equity, invest in community-based organizations, create affordable housing communities, just to name a few. But I think that it's important and these are a good starting place, but the reason why we wanted to talk to members of the community about the report is to get more feedback on what folks would like to see, what people think would work, would not work, and what did we miss in the report? Because we didn't, we covered a lot, but maybe not everything.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know.
I'd like to
I
pick in that.
Just double check that you can.
The supervisor said not to bring forward a report without recommendations. So each domain area does have recommendations. The intent is to try to do this report annually. We don't necessarily know if they're going to do it with Dominguez Hills annually, but Dr. Nicol and I have already said there's so much to unpack in this report and to focus on that we intend to expand this research, because to do this research right would take 2 or 3 years, and we both had numerous research projects that we were working on at the time. But and the research window for us was relatively short. It was 18 months. And there was a lot more that we could have put in the report. And one of the things that is going to happen is a conversation amongst the policymakers, whether it's the Board of Supervisors or LA City Council or some of the local city councils around the surrounding municipalities, is that you cannot talk about continuing to evenly divide county resources or state resources or city resources amongst the council seats or amongst the supervisorial districts when you have a history of economic deprivation that is significantly less than other parts of the city. As Dr. Nicol presented the supervisorial breakdown, there's one of those in every domain. You can see districts 1 and 2 have been historically underfunded, or the quality of life in those districts have been disproportionate to other areas. The more wealthy areas are able to attract more dollars. They're able to get matching dollars with investment and with developers. They're more desirable areas to go to develop. But poverty is not eradicated by status quo investment. If you split the money across the board, then no matter how much money is put into the districts, the disproportionality is going to remain the same.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why the reparations conversation is so important, because now you really are talking about equity versus equality.
Yep.
We can't be equal to anybody getting the same thing that they get, and they already have a significant advantage across the domains. There's going to have to be an intentional effort to make up for past discrimination. systemic discrimination of which both the city and the county are a part of.
Thank you. Dr. Samad and Dr. Nicol, I think I heard Dr. Really Thomas come on. Want to try you again, Doctor. Just turning it over to you to say any remarks that you would like to.
Appreciate it. Salute the leadership of the Empowerment Congress and raising the civic IQ for our community. I certainly want to extend my acknowledgement to Dr. Samad and Dr. Nicol for being here. This is important work. The assets that are at our disposal need to be leveraged at every juncture in the research space, largely speaking in the intellectual space. The universities play a critical role in that regard. So I wish to salute the work of the Dimely Institute at Dominguez and the extended work that's happening to support this. We take note of the work that Artie has done, Artie needs to be doing, but we need to protect and lift that up. Supervisor Mitchell is seeking to do that by virtue of her advancement of this effort. And the only way to ensure that democracy is fulfilled is to drive forward the respect for the respective stakeholders in the space. I mean that ethnically, and on that basis, that means that the African-American stakeholders have to be at the table, armed with resources. One such resource is the research apparatus. It shouldn't be underestimated. The issue of the politics surrounding the African-American community, broadly defined in the county of Los Angeles, one of the largest African-American communities anywhere in the United States, well into the top 5 in the category, larger than most states representing African-American communities. We need to be cognizant of that data, drive forward in terms of the census data as it relates to our space in the city of Los Angeles, the county of Los Angeles, the state of California, and leverage that accordingly. And so I want to salute the work that's being done here. I want to be supportive of it in whatever ways I can. The Empowerment Congress, with its leadership, with Dr. Byard, with Danette McBride, with Gloria Davis, and the Civic Engagement and Leadership Working Group is all about that. And we are delighted that you have taken us up on the offer to host this conversation. And I trust that there'll be more well into the future.
Thank you.
And I will restrain myself as it relates to any commentary about Dr. Samad. Thank you so much.
We appreciate that. We appreciate
Yeah. This is
You know that we brought this stuff to him at some point in time. But
right.
He had a heavy lift, and oftentimes he was by himself. One
yes.
person can't do it all.
That's right.
But, part of our community's challenge is not to look at what I call misery activism.
Right.
somebody gets killed or something dies or a police event happens.
Right.
I mean, that's the low-hanging fruit.
Right.
Okay. Or, I call them community reactionists as opposed to community activists, because there is work to be done when everything appears to be going fine. The systems continue to build the inequities. If the only time we call out injustice is when it becomes obvious, then we're doing ourselves a significant disservice.
Absolutely.
Community will continue to always be chasing the ball instead of getting ahead of the ball.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that framing, that construct, Dr. Samad, is critically important. And when we engage in efforts like that, and which you and Dr. Nicol are working through, let me just hasten to make the point that we need to leverage. I said this before and I want to restate it. We need to leverage our stake in the space and do so unapologetically. We shouldn't be reduced to deficit modeling our reality. In other words, we do an asset building approach to this on the assumption that we bring value, unique value, to the space. Now, that doesn't deny anybody else's reality. It essentially says that our reality has to be reckoned with. The historical narrative that is advanced uniquely by the African-American community in the context of the city, the county, the state, the nation, needn't be apologized for. It needs to be advanced in a way that it is seen as adding value. And so the deficit model approach to it is essentially what you were describing a moment ago. And we have to talk about this research in such a way that it doesn't put us in a box of pathologizing our reality. And that's the temptation. And it's hard for people to understand how to advance a narrative that's asset-based. And unless we can do that, speaking the language of educating, engaging, and empowering, which is what the Empowerment Congress has sought to be about. To your point, Dr. Samad, we do ourselves a profound disservice unless we can get our heads around not being caused to shrink owing to majoritarian politics. No. Everybody who's at the table deserves to be respected, and they have to leverage their positions accordingly. And we need to understand that there's a lot that we bring to the table, and it's not to the exclusive benefit of African Americans. It is in fact beneficial to the whole of the body politic.
You know, I always want to say thank you, Supervisor, thank you, Councilman, but to Dr. Nicol's point,
right?
You know, that Martin Luther King, you know, serviced 8 cities essentially, the only hospital within a 10-mile radius, and it was closed when you took office, and you got it back up. If you didn't do anything else, because you had essentially nearly 2 million people at risk, at health risk,
right,
having a hospital in their
That's right.
You know, and you know, the hope was that you would get a second one or a third one up. You know, who says that our community just has to have one hospital?
Well, that's not the case. And be mindful of the fact that Harbor UCLA is in the 2nd district as well.
Yeah.
And so there are 2 public hospitals. MLK technically is not a public hospital. It's a private community hospital on public land adjacent to the public outpatient center that has 70 subspecialties there in the context of a campus with Drew University and more. So the question is, how do you leverage the assets? You got an autism center coming up on that campus. All this is fundamentally important as it speaks to what our historical perspective is and our contemporary narrative has to be. It's the only way you can survive in this environment. And why I think so highly of what the two of you are advancing is because it helps to construct a perspective that it invites and or demands respect.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna go back and take my nap now.
Naps are important.
It's getting late in the evening for me. Thank you and God bless you. I have a 7 o'clock that I must be engaged for, but I do want to salute the work. And there are some 60 plus people on this call, and I think that's well worth applauding and saluting.
Yes.
So thank you very much. It says that there's an appetite and we need to do all that we can to nurture it.
Thank you.
Thank
Much
you.
love and respect.
Thank
Thank you. All right, I want to go back to the chat because there's a couple questions probably you all can answer very quickly, and then also wanted to bring in Heather because you are busy responding to folks and wanted to give you an opportunity to come off of mute. But one of the questions is from LaQuisha, and she asked about the report touching on Black student achievement. Is that something that you all were able to explore so that we can get the county involved with pressuring the state to properly fund public education as it pertains to Black students?
So the report does have the education domain, and we presented both the data and some interviews from subject matter experts. One who is the outgoing president of the Council of Black Administrators within LA Unified, Candace McClurkin, and then also Dr. Bernadette Lucas, who is the Chief Academic Officer for Inglewood Unified School District. And so they talked about, some of the findings is that come up for education is that fewer Black children are enrolled in childcare than other groups, that are standardized test scores for Black students are lower in math and English, and a significant discussion about what are some of the factors that lead to those statistics, things like implicit bias of the teachers themselves,
Right.
that kids have to face, that feeling of not being supported or feeling like they belong. And so this is I would say the education section is really, we did not go in depth on the education section. This was supposed to be a later domain. The idea when we came to this was that we would do 2 domains at a time.
Mhm.
A lot of focus. So health and criminal justice was our big priority. And then subsequently, we would have an academic research consortium of experts that would help us tease out in more detail what should be done with regards to education, economics, and homelessness. So I would say that those statistics are a starting point, but they definitely are not, it's not comprehensive. We would need significant more time to get those education statistics, particularly because you're covering all the way from preschool all the way to college attendance.
Mhm.
And so it's a huge domain, a really important domain, because it sets up the employment domain and other areas. They're all interrelated and interconnected. So I would say it's a starting place, but it's by no means complete.
Got it. Okay, good. And then I see Marvin, your hand was raised. Also, Sheila Jackson. So I'll start with Sheila's question, then we'll go to Marvin, and then I want to give Heather some time. If that sounds okay. Sheila's asking, and I'm not quite sure where you're looking, Sheila, so it may be helpful if you come off of mute, but she's asking, why did the ratings go down when the mayor was elected?
Mm.
Which ratings are you talking about?
Oh, for Compton, when I use that example?
Yeah.
Okay, so the credit rating of a city can go, it's just like the fluctuations in the market. So, you know, think about it this way. We used to have, well, not used to, we kind of still have restrictive covenants that would prohibit Black people from moving into certain spots. And if Black people moved in, the thought was that your property value would go down. So basically from that same perspective, when Dollarhide became the first Black mayor of Compton, because Compton was a very white city up until probably the 1960s. When he was elected, then people who had businesses, white people who had small businesses, or folks who lived in Compton, white people who lived, they moved out. And so your credit rating goes down. And that's essentially what happened. It was just plain old racism because they didn't think a Black man should lead an all-white city because it hadn't turned over and become a chocolate city yet. It was in that process of Black people were crunched together, smushed together in little ethnic enclaves, and Compton looked like it would be a suburban, you know, like a suburban hotspot for Black people, and that it didn't last very long.
Okay, thank you. Marvin?
Thank you. Thank you very much for acknowledging me. Dr. Nicol, thank you so much for addressing the issue of education, particularly as it pertains to our males of color, and more importantly, of our Black males. We know that, and I love your point about the connection between their education and employment, which also equals wealth and health. And so there is this ramification of issues that come about as the lack of, and when we look at Black males and enrollment from transferring to from community colleges to higher education, we see that many of them start, but about 76% of them don't go back, don't return. And so that's a big issue. So I really appreciate the work behind that. And I love to be involved in any way that I can with that process, because that is the focus of my dissertation, to really look at South LA and the state of our males of color in terms of how they have historically, and we as a Black community over time have used our cultural wealth to survive the various racism and fight the various systemic institutions that have intentionally been designed to oppress us. And so but really want to acknowledge that point of education, because we cannot talk about all of this without addressing this other pipeline when we compare our prison pipeline and our enrollment pipelines at these local institutions. So thank you for bringing that to the forefront.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment. I just want to say something because I'm finishing a book about the erosion of affirmative action in the Cal State system. That if you look at the statistics for when affirmative action was cut in 1996, Black student population and Native American student population cut in half in the CSU. And even with Latinos, whose numbers have doubled population-wise, and their graduation rates have doubled population-wise from high school, there's only been a 57% completion rate. And that stopped in, I think it was 2010 or 20, something like that, and has never gotten higher. So there's something built into the system that says students of color, Black, Native American, and Latino students, but Black and Native American students in particular, there's no safety net to make sure that these students get the support that they need, because we've taken all mentions of race-based initiatives out. Even our EOP programs say that you have to be in abject poverty to even get tutoring services on most campuses. So your family can't, if your family can contribute $1,501 you are ineligible in the Cal State system for any tutoring services.
Yep. And that historically, there have been some historical highlights that get us here. So this is not something that happened overnight. So I'm very interested in exploring those roots as to how we got here. But it all boils down to the same social injustices that systemically have been permeated throughout our communities of color. So
Yes.
thank you for that.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So I want to turn it over to Heather. Heather, please introduce yourself. Thank you for helping to monitor the chat. And then also, after you introduce yourself, Gloria asked a really good question, and I felt like you gave a really great answer. But for those of us who may be challenged and can't see the chat, would love to understand how you all came up with the domains that you're focusing on. But Heather, introduce yourself.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. My name is Heather Jew Northover. I go by she, her pronouns. I work in the County of Los Angeles Antiracism, Diversity, and Inclusion Initiative. So excited that there are a number of folks on this call who seem really interested and excited about this report. I know here in Artie and in our collaboration with Cal State University Dominguez Hills and Capacity to Impact are very excited about this report. I think it's probably the first of its kind that the county has released. I really appreciate how interactive it is. And we hope in the same way that our Board of Supervisors are excited about it and intend to take this information and move it into action, that other folks in our communities can access the report and let it inform the work that you are all doing in your respective organizations in terms of systems change, policies, programs, and services. We see this report as something that absolutely will not sit on a shelf collecting dust, as so many reports beforehand has done. I think, there's been a number of different reports throughout the different decades, looking in one way or another on the state of Black LA County. And we have not seen the outcomes and achievements that we should expect. If there were a lot of investment and resources put toward moving reports into action. And so we really hope and expect that this body of work will accelerate what we're doing here in the county, as well as among our community stakeholders and partnerships. To Gloria's question about, how did we choose the different domains? As Dr. Nicol said and alluded to, this was our inaugural report. I think when you see future iterations, we will expand out the domains as well as sort of subpopulations to focus on. We know that Black Angelenos are not a monolith and want to be reflective and honor the diversity that are part of the community. But in terms of this report directly, we really looked at 36 indicators across the domains that you heard Dr. Nicol call out in the report: health, including physical and mental health, housing, income and employment, education, safety, and justice. And really ensuring that, again, to Dr. Samad and Dr. Nicol's point, to think about not just what is the data, but what were some of the drivers and root causes of the outcomes that we're seeing. We know that these indicators are not exhaustive, but they were chosen based on input from local experts in the field and our review of peer-reviewed literature in each of the topics that you see highlighted, and really thinking about what that means in terms of how we can close the gaps that we're seeing and also celebrate the bright spots that we saw in some of the data that was being highlighted. I think as we move forward in future reports, we will explore additional indicators and topics based on feedback from, research team, the Academic Research Consortium that Dr. Nicol and Samad talked about. And, we would love to hear from you about things that you wished you had seen in this inaugural report. And we can talk about inputting some of those into the future reports. We definitely want these to be community driven and community informed, because we see these reports as your all reports as well.
Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Oh, sorry.
That's
Go
what's,
go ahead.
no, I just wanted to, that's what civic engagement is all about. And that's why we have formed this working group, and we just look forward to more of us getting involved in this. And this is only the beginning for this report. We've already started planning for in-person sometime in September, October. So everyone, please stay tuned.
Mhm.
I will say, Gloria, and that was an excellent synopsis that Heather gave. There was a lot of back and forth as to what should be included, what should be excluded, because there's so many things coming at the Black community. But we basically looked at what impacts the quality of life of African Americans in Southern California. And basically racism is economic. Anything that has a racial sentiment or a racial tie to it is tied to economics in some kind of way. And everything else stems from economics, from education to housing to health. And then those with assets, or those with homes, or those communities that have commerce, they're protected in a whole different way. Basically dictates public safety and policing policies. Dr. Nicol and I have been tasked with putting together a research consortium that's supposed to be the next scope of work that we're looking at. So if members of the Empowerment Congress want to be a part of that, just reach out to Dr. Nicol or myself, and we'll be sure that they're included.
Absolutely.
Great. We have time for probably one more question. Byron, I saw that you had a question in the chat and thought that would be great for you to come off of mute and just share it. And then I don't want to put Dr. Nicol on the spot or Dr. Samad, but you were sharing your screen. And if anyone's like me, I really appreciate how interactive this report is and all of that good stuff. It's very beautiful, easy to read, flow through all of that. I also like to download, you know, a PDF.
We're still on there without a hard copy of the report, but we do have a companion piece.
Companion piece, yeah. So,
but we want the full report too. So we might have to lean on the county a little bit more to get the whole 109-page report.
well, I did want to highlight the companion piece, and I thought maybe after Byron's question, maybe Dr. Nicol could show us where we could go to download that. So at least we have kind of the summary, right? In print until we get, you know, the full length. So, but
when we do the piece in September,
yes,
you guys determine it, we can bring you hard copies of those, because we got.
Oh, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, Byron.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Nichols and Dr. Samad, and for the wonderful report. One of the questions I do have is, does the report speak to mental health inequities around Black LA, and what types of metrics are in place to be proactive around the mental health services and making sure that funding is used to level the playing field around trauma and trauma-informed care, especially within Black LA?
Yes, this is a great question. So because we had health as one big broad category, we separated out physical and mental health. And so there's a whole dedicated section to mental health. And we look at things like depression, treatment for depression. Have you talked to a counselor? Have you, suicide, thoughts of suicide, suicide rates, and so forth. So all of that is contained in terms of both numbers and then also, let's see, I believe Dr. Dixon from King Hospital spoke about getting the treatment necessary. One of the bright spots in the report was that Black people are actually going to get treatment for mental health issues and talking about it more than past generations. And so those numbers are actually, that's a really bright spot that more likely to get regular therapy or at least have some kind of counselor to speak with. Some of the things that we still need to look at is what are the factors with suicide rates by youth? Because we have suicide rates generally, but we need to zero in on what is prompting our youth. Things like social media pressures. We haven't delved into that area yet, but that's something that we need to look at. And then looking at alternative types of therapy or counseling, what is the role of the church in providing an alternative for people to reach out and get some support. So we have a ways to go, but I think that, like I said, the bright spot is that there's more attention and normalizing a conversation around mental health. And I think it's starting to catch on in our community that often we think of it being pretty taboo to have those conversations, but now it's like, no, we really need to get the support to people.
Yeah, and I think Dr. Nichols, to be more specific, and I'm happy to hear that your report is sharing that more African Americans are going to mental health and gaining mental health services. But I also would love for the report to deal with them going and the outcome of their treatment, because a lot of times we go, but we're not getting the sufficient services that we need while we're there. And a lot of times it's more traumatizing, especially within African Americans that I've seen being a mental health clinician, that when African Americans come, they don't get the services that contextualizes their issue. And so they leave treatment not having their needs met, nor do they feel, encouraged by the treatment to want to continue it.
Yeah, so we
They
definitely
suffer in silence.
Yeah, we definitely need to look at culturally relevant forms of mental health support, because I think that, if you're going to someone who doesn't understand your cultural background and all of those things that affect your mental health, your stress, and all of those things. So we definitely, I'm glad you raised this issue of the need to get the kind of culturally relevant care that would lend itself to people feeling like they are being heard, and not automatically prescribe medication without there being this kind of wraparound support of culture. What is the role of culture? What's the role of church and spirituality? What's the role of and if medical intervention is necessary?
Yeah, I do want to follow that up real quick, Bishop. There is a big intersection in this report between mental health and public safety.
Yes.
And we touched on some of the history of that when, Reagan, cut the budget in 1983, and LA County's response was to close, the mental health centers. And when African Americans, have a mental health episode, we left it oftentimes to police.
Correct.
To address it. And many of the encounters, law enforcement encounters, are basically people who are having an episode and the police don't know how to respond to it with anything other than deadly force.
Right.
And that's where we have a real disconnect in our society. Now I know Mayor Bass is trying to put in place intervention teams to resolve a portion of that issue, but there are 27 law enforcement agencies in Southern California who do not necessarily, subscribe to that.
Right.
And who have a more adverse reaction to the presence of one, race, and two, the insufficient background to recognize when someone is having a mental health episode. And so we can't talk about it, in a vacuum, for the city of Los Angeles without addressing the surrounding communities, because our people are mobile.
Yes.
And they're migrating into these other areas that have historically bad race relations as it relates to public policy.
Thank you.
All right, Dr. Nicol, give us that companion piece.
So what you can do, the companion piece really came from some of the summary of wrong link. So if you look in area 4, the report highlights and key findings. The companion piece highlighted these areas. So if you go to summary of findings, So in each of the domains, highlight 4 or 5 really salient data points. So life expectancy here, health insurance for mental health. So that was a significant portion of the companion piece. Also part of the companion piece was kind of the introduction as to why, the setup as to why the report was necessary. And, what was the county's response to, the COVID-19 pandemic, and also the summer of 2022 with all, the activism around the murder of George Floyd. So the companion piece is section 1 and section 4 primarily, a little bit of section 3 if you look across these areas here. So probably the first 4 sections, that would be that truncated version is what ended up being the companion piece.
Okay, thank you. And did you show where we can download it? I'm sorry.
Heather put it in the chat.
Okay, great. All right.
Oh yeah, there it is. Okay, let me go off.
Okay, I think we've come to a close. Gloria, you wanna?
Yes, I'll wrap it up. Well, the time goes so fast. I can't believe I've already been on an hour and a half.
I'm still awake.
I know, me too. I'm still at the office. Well, on behalf of the Empowerment Congress and our founder, Dr. Mark Ridley Thomas, and my co-chairs this evening, we deeply appreciate you sharing this evening with us on this critical report, the state of Black Los Angeles. And I just want a special shout out to our presenters, Dr. Nicol and Dr. Samad. Just thank you for being with us. This is such great information that our community needs. And I can hardly wait for the second part of this. And I just want to thank all of the participants for being so interactive and all of the questions this evening. This just felt so great. Just, to hear this information and having the honor of our founder coming on. I wasn't expecting that this evening. And also I want to thank Heather. She came on and, just shared more information. Like I said, this is such a wonderful report, and this is only the beginning. I want to tell you that the Civic Engagement Work Group meet every 4th Tuesday of the month from 6 p.m. to 7:30. I think in August we may go dog, but check our website at empowermentcongress.org to keep an update on that. And our call to action this evening is to get this report, get the companion report, start reading it, and be ready with even more questions. We really got to dig into this, and we got to use this data in all the ways that we've talked about this evening. And I also want to bring your attention to our other work groups. We have the homeless work group, the charter reform, the financial empowerment, and of course, the civic engagement. So we hope to see you guys next time back here. And the Empowerment Congress mission is to educate, engage, and empower. And we hope we have done that this evening. Thank you, and we will see everybody next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you, you too.